I think in London we have the London Plan, which is a development plan which sets out the requirements for the whole city, and within that we've had for a number of years supplementary planning guidance around play and informal recreation, it's called, which is really focused on that issue, and it sets out a requirement for 10 square metres per child. And so I'm getting straight into the kind of heart of what we have to deal with as architects and designers, urban designers and planners. And essentially that 10 square metres per child is quite an ambitious target when the densities start to go up. But we've recently been looking at that, and if we talk the same language, we have dwellings per hectare in the UK. If you, I think, are hitting about 200 dwellings per hectare, that's about your limit in terms of providing that 10 square metres per child on your development site. So I think the trick is to kind of understand your entire area and have a kind of what we would call a local development plan that sort of sets out how much space there is available throughout the borough or the city, and then you can start to think about how much space you need for kids. But the 10 square metres is quite a good rule of thumb for a city site, I think. We don't think about children when we start thinking about strategic moves when we're planning cities, do we? We kind of think first about perhaps the public transport system and pedestrians and sustainable transport these days, which is great, and then we kind of tackle the car. And then further down the line, we might think about where to put those things that you just mentioned. But I think the interesting thing about starting with children is that they use space very differently. They move around very differently. They're going to different locations to us, but they also play and move in a really different way. So if you start by thinking about them and how they might move around, then you can start to think about their day-to-day activities, and you can start to plan all those places in. So it's a combination of kind of what we call doorstep play, but also access to these places that they're using every day. Different cities tackle this in different ways, and some cities, even within the UK, feel quite differently to the kind of gating that you're talking about. And in fact, you can go across Europe and there's a kind of different approach, and there's a mix, or there's a kind of culture around gating and not gating. And I think from an urban planning perspective, there's a kind of move towards keeping them open, and I've seen all sorts. So I think it's about thinking about how the child comes through the front door, how they get upstairs, and then how they get into that shared space that they can play with their friends if that's available. So things like balconies and what we call deck access or gallery access, where there's kind of opportunities for them to kind of get out onto the facade, call down to their friends. Or if you think about how we lay out the upper floors in terms of dual aspect or single aspect flats, that has a real impact, I think, on children, because if they are facing outwards towards the street and there's nowhere for them to see their friends playing, that's very different to if they're facing into that shared space, if we're talking about the courtyard blocks. So trying to find tricks like lobbies and circulation cores that can see both ways, and kind of seeing value in those spaces. They're not just kind of lost, you know, and not counted in the net area. They're actually a really important part for, you know, neighbours to bump into each other, but also for kids to kind of navigate and get around. And then the final thing I always think about is the idea that you're not going to give a kid a fob, you know, like a little key, because they're going to lose it straight away. So think about how they can move around, ring a doorbell, get back upstairs. So the security element is not always the same for a child. So lots of things to think about. Well, there's retrofitting and there's cars. So those are two quite really meaty questions, aren't they? So I think there's really good examples of retrofit schemes. In the book, there's at least one, King's Crescent, where we've got an infill and retrofit of the existing blocks where there's maybe like overcladding and winter gardens and making those existing blocks warmer. But cars are the big question. Usually in the UK we're having to kind of maintain the level of existing car ownership, but if we're close to a public transport stop, we won't be providing any new car spaces for the new residents unless they have a disabled badge that they bring with them. So we can kind of slowly start to manage down the kind of car ownership as we go. And I think the trick is to not think car first in anything you're doing in terms of the layout and in terms of your conversations with your residents. Get them really thinking about play, get them really thinking about that social space, and they realise how valuable it is before you start to introduce the topic of the car.